Fairies. Fey creatures as a whole have popped up around all of human history. Wherever a natural phenomenon goes unexplained, it is usually blamed on their actions. The epicenter of their origins is found in Western Europe, but as the world gets more and more connected, their influence spreads on a global scale, and it eventually reached Japan, meaning, of course, it just had to be added to Pokemon. It's Fairy Month, y'all, and you know what that means? The exact same videos that were in Dragon Month, but fairy themed. Woo! Airhorn.mp3, or whatever you kids are using these days. And much like the dragon type, fairy type is also quite interesting. At least interesting enough to require its own video. But since we did this with dragon and fairy, we're just gonna make this a whole new series. After all, you people love Pokemon videos, and as my good friend Mr. Krabs says, I like money. Which is also why I'm pointing out this Fairy Month t-shirt design available for pre-order now. The supplies are limited as the number of pre-orders, so pre-ordering them is kind of the only way to really get them. So link in the description. Gnoggin.net. Got lots of other stuff too, like these stickers. Woo! Let's get on the roll. The fairy type was added in Generation 6, Pokemon X and Y.
And then it killed the franchise! Coincidence? No. Just poor marketing on their part.
Would you be positive for once? Go! Get back to VP! Anywho, Game Freak has actually gone on the record stating that the reason fairy type was added was to bring dragons down a notch or two without actually nerfing them. Alright. Well, what's something so powerful that it could easily beat up dragons? Perhaps some eldritch type, horror type, an unspeakable power capable of tearing draconic beings to shreds. Or we could just make cute baby Pokemon and just say that they're stronger. I guess the juxtaposition is kind of funny. And along with some all-new fairy-type Pokemon, they went back and changed 22 older Pokemon by making them fairy-type too. Nothing wrong with that, they were basically fairies already. And when they introduced Steel and Dark, they did the same thing. But the big question then is, why were they given the fairy type? And what even is the fairy type? Those are the questions we answer in the Not Type series. But just like with Dragon, it's big enough that we're splitting it into 2 videos. So today we're answering the question, what is fairy type? Fairy types are generally cute and typically pink. And while I'd rather not talk about Snubbull, it's noteworthy that in canon, women love them. It must be the pug thing again. It's so ugly it's cute. I just don't get why you would want a genetic disaster of an animal. But back to actually cute Pokemon. Most of the fairies are pink, with only some exceptions, like Meryl. But again, going back to the question, why are they mostly pink and cute? Well, other than trying to expand the game audience to include more girls, because we all know girls love pink stuff! Game Freak. Fun fact! Apparently the whole blue for boys, pink for girls is a Western thing. Apparently in the East, they are sort of reversed, as blue is much more of a feminine color, flowing like water. Whereas pink is masculine, like fire. Pink is just light red after all, but here in the Western world we've seen pink as girly for decades now, and because of advertising and all those darn baby boomers, we, of course, have the media power to just explode our cultural values across the world. And so this mindset has started to become the norm everywhere, even the Far East. And pink works out fairly well because Game Freak needed a color to represent the type, as they do with every type, and there wasn't a pink colored type yet, besides some depictions of Psychic. But it's not like pastel-y pink now, is it? Plus it works. Fairy types are generally more feminine, and also puffy and cute. Light, airy, fluffy, majestic, sparkly, pink! But thankfully, besides just pink and girly, some Pokemon actually have much more inspired reasons to why they are fairy type. Again, we'll go over that in another video. However, the reason I bring their diversity up is because the word fairy itself means a lot of different things. At one time, it was a small human that had a knack for trickery. Other times, it straight up meant goblins. Sometimes, fairy means literally magic or enchanted. Not even creature. It could be a rock and could still be fairy. Garbink. So, the type is not just a single trope. It's not just Tinkerbell the Pokemon. The fairy type really encompasses magic. It's similar to the dragon type in this regard, but unlike dragon type, their magic is clearly different. They also differ from dragons in that they were an added type, a non-native type to the game. And by looking at the older Pokemon they went back and gave the type to, we may be able to get a better grasp on how this type differs from, say, normal type. A really good example of this is the Jigglypuff line. Previously mono-normal and now normal fairy. It's a quick-to-temper creature that is able to lull travelers to sleep and then causes mischief. Which already sounds mighty close to a fairy tale now that you mention it. Mr. Mime's dex entries say its pantomime skills are wonderful. You may become enraptured while watching it. But next thing you know, Mr. Mime has made a real wall. That, along with its Ultra Dex Moon entry, which states that if you're not impressed, it attacks you, basically means that Mr. Mime is a performer that enjoys entertaining people, or inconveniencing people. And if you don't think it's super neat, it hates you. It's another very common fairy tale trope. Mawile is different though. It being based off of a dangerous yokai, a Japanese spirit, you'd think, how could it be fairy type? Fairies are good! And that thinking is to Mawile's benefit. You see, Mawile is a trap at its heart. It lures you in with its cuteness, which, by definition, is a classical fairy trait. A fairy tale, we all know, is a story that is used to teach, or present a lesson to children, or to tell a narrative to help us humans interact with our environment, and dare I say it, society. However, where the line between a story and a fairy tale is drawn is rather mixed. Normally, the addition of magic or non-real beasts are found in fairy tales, and from these tales and imaginative stories, our culture has created a sort of understanding of the tales, and as such, we have a basis of what magic really is. It's this understanding that helps us create basic ideas or images that other humans can interpret easily. Basically, humans like things they already know, and most of us have been told stories of dragons and knights, fairies and demons and such. They are an assumed variable in marketing. It's a common thing that we all have in common. Yeah. But because of this sort of universal standard of magic, we can figure out what truly makes a fairy type a fairy, because it's based off of actual mythos. But classical fairies are quite different than what they are today. Remember, marketing. Kids don't want to hear about some gross old lady who eats kids. That's pretty messed up. They want to learn about friendship and stuff, right? Or at least their parents want them to. So there isn't a very concrete connection between all of the classic fairy lore and Pokemon, although that's not to say that there's none. There are quite a few things that predominate from fairy tales, one being their weaknesses, like steel. Most people today associate fairies with things like nature spirits in the form of sprites or pixies, and being embodiments of nature magic, things that harm nature would harm them too. Steel is man-made. It's as unnatural as you could get back when people believed in fairies. As such, as just one of many examples, in the tale of Maleficent, the Fey guardian of the forest, Maleficent is weakened by just being in the presence of steel, and the king, wanting to keep all Fey actions outside of his kingdom, surrounded the kingdom with a thorny iron fence. This weakness to steel is actually why horseshoes are considered good luck. By having horseshoes of cold iron on your horse, you would keep trickster goblins away and fairies away while you traveled. Steel is a poison to Fey creatures, and so is actual poison, thus the weakness to poison. Anything that kills nature would also be harmful to nature spirits, obviously. Thus the weakness to fire too. Forest fires are no joke, and also, all three of those things are associated with mankind. We made steel, we mastered fire, and our poisons and pollutants are extremely potent. These are the themes that unite almost all fairies in myth and Mon. Though sometimes there are stories about fey creatures making their own steel, such as some goblins, but that's a much more recent fantasy thing. A big difference between modern and classical fairies. However, while they may have their differences, they do have one other thing in common: magic. You see, fairy or fae are all magical creatures by default. Magic incarnate, much like dragons. However, where dragons were beasts of might and terror, fae were more so trickster magicians. We explained that Pokemon are magical creatures in the Dragon-type video, and magical creatures are all equal. But some magical creatures are more equal than others. Dragon and fairy, to be exact. I mean, there's a reason that they are both tied for the third rarest type. It's because they're mythical creatures, you know? Fairy tales. In the Dragon-type video, we talked about how Dragon-type was essentially all about raw, arcane power. They control magic, bend it to their will through sorcery. And by comparing that to the much newer fairy type, we can really figure out what fairy is. And seeing how most of you totally understood my D&D references last time, and I totally know stuff and totally don't have to ask people, I'm going to try again to explain the differences of fairy magic to dragon magic. You see, where dragons control and twist magic or mana to do their bidding, fairies instead invoke magic. If a dragon is a sorcerer, fairies are much more like druids and clerics. They aren't taking over and reshaping the magic. Instead, they are channeling the world's mana and using it in a more recycled sort of way. Basically, borrowing power from the divine beings of nature. Nature's own magic, spirit, or aura is everywhere and everything has it. Flowers use this magic to grow slowly, but with the help of a sentient magic user, they can grow rapidly. Fairy magic. The moonlight is constantly radiating magic down to earth, and with just a little tweak, you can focus that magic into one spot. Not completely changing and twisting the flow, turning it into a completely different kind of magic, but rather just giving that natural magic a little nudge, focusing the natural magic that it has. Fairy magic, light, fluffy, fairy magic, comes naturally, unlike dragons' dark arcane magic, twisting and bending it to its will. That moonlight, that mana from the flower, the dragon steals it and turns it into a raw blast of pure arcane energy. And this is the distinction that explains why the dragon type is completely useless against fairies. Fairies simply redirect the magic around them or just ignore it. You know, flow and all that. They are more natural. They use the flow of mana instead of controlling it. This scene here in the anime, a Salamence blasts an arcane force at a Wigglytuff, and it's as if the Wigglytuff is just walking towards a slight breeze. If you are a being that is magic incarnate, and your entire power involves flowing mana along, then being struck by a blast of mana is nothing. You just flow it along around you, effortlessly. We see this sort of flow in many fairy moves. I mean, geomancy is literally that, but others of note are Nature's Madness and Moonlight. In fact, Misty Terrain is another good example of all this. Most terrain moves change the battlefield to make their own type stronger, but Fairy Terrain is special. It makes it so all non-volatile status effects are ignored, such as sleep and paralysis. And here's the big thing, it makes all dragon-type moves deal half damage, no matter who they are attacking. Misty Terrain is almost like bringing the fairy realm to our own world. Its effects are leaking or perhaps being summoned by the Pokemon. In many fairy tales, fae creatures live in their own realm, separate from ours. But sometimes they cross over, such as during a full moon. Anyway, this intense, misty terrain is like a field of mana or aura or infinity energy that is much more difficult for dragons to control or take over. This terrain strengthens nature's own flow of mana. So now, for the dragon, it's almost like trying to take over and control an entire river rather than a small stream. The natural current is much more powerful. Though, because of this, it also fills all of the Pokemon here with fighting spirit, as infinity energy is abundant, meaning recovery from status conditions like sleep and paralysis happen instantly. They are nullified. This really helps to define our fairy type. They need to be some sort of magical creature that is in tune with nature, but not like plants and such. That's a grass thing. Rather, fairy types are in tune with the inherent powers of nature's spirit. Mana. They feel the magical flow and can use it by just redirecting it, letting the magic do most of the work. Now time for a tangent. Sort of. The move Hidden Power changes its type depending on what Pokemon uses it, and it can become any type besides Fairy. Hidden Power will get its own video eventually, but in summary, Hidden Power's calculations and such are based off of your Pokemon's IVs. Basically, it's the true power of your Pokemon's cumulative strength, meaning the type the move is actually changes as your Pokemon levels up. It's weird. But the fact that it can't be Fairy type actually helps my point. Fairy type magic is a magic that is essentially unlearnable, or at least not easily learnable. Hidden Power is a TM that many Pokemon can learn, and it would be quite a bit strange for all of these Pokemon to sometimes just be able to invoke the light magic of nature at will, you know? Unlike the Dragon type, which takes over and controls magic like wizards and sorcerers. A learned way. This may also be the reason why there are only 2 Fairy-type TMs, Play Rough and Dazzling Gleam, neither of which are all that fairy-y. Anything can play rough, really. And its name in Japanese is Frolic. Just frolicking. It's pretty easy to do. And then Dazzling Gleam is just a reskin of the rock-type move Power Gem. So I feel like it's more or less a more elegant or cute move compared to Power Gem, but otherwise it's just Power Gem, but like without the rock. It uses a little bit of fairy magic, but doesn't have the main soul of fairy magic. And this leads to the next point. The fairy type in Pokemon almost seems like a pseudo-light type. But hang on, don't you worry. I don't mean like the opposite of the dark type, which is the translation of evil type. So, I don't mean like that, I think. Or at least not much. Fairies in real life, real tales, were not very nice. Honestly, they are normally really, really mean. This is because of the whole lesson, moral, fairy tale thing all about stuff. In fact, most of the fairy tales you read are about how the fairies are hiding away from humans, only coming out to either harm or hurt them. Even the benevolent ones normally have ulterior motives. And if they do enjoy human company, it's either to show off their skills or to inconvenience them, much like the Pokemon we talked about earlier, Jigglypuff and Mr. Mime. However, in more modern fairy tales, we see fairies and elves and such helping humans understand morals and whatnot rather than teaching through negative repercussions. They teach us through more positive fashions. However, back to how it's light, there are many Pokemon moves that create light, or that have light in its main mechanic. And I don't necessarily mean light as in luminance, I mean light magic. Good magic, where dragon would be dark magic. Fairy is light magic. It's like Final Fantasy, white mage versus black mage. It's not inherently like an evil versus good thing. Rather, it's just how I and many others see the magic, which also would further explain fairies' immunity to dragon. Dark magic tends to be fireballs, lightning strikes, arcane blasts. Offensive light magic tends to be nature flowy, healing, and magical shields able to block the offensive magic, which follows literal light and dark. Dark is mightily powerful and spooky and dangerous, but with enough light, the dark's kinda useless. And speaking of light, specifically the light from the moon, as I implied earlier, fairy-type Pokemon really do have a penchant for the moon, and there's more to it than just fairies and pink and girly, and the moon is the catalyst of feminine power and alchemy and mysticism. It's actually quite I mean, that was pretty deep, but like it's even deeper. You see, the moon is a very mysterious thing. It's huge and bright during the night, and it disappears monthly. Imagine yourself being an old-timey peasant looking at this thing every night because you have nothing else to do, and it just disappears sometimes. That's pretty spooky. Plus, all of your local fairy tales include the moon as a catalyst for magic events. Werewolves? Full moon. Accidentally wandering into the Fey realm, never to be seen again? Moon, being able to see magical creatures because it's being illuminated by magical light? It's moonlight. Heck, the full moon is basically the brightest dark you can get. And we all know our imaginations run wild when we can almost make things out. Stupid survival instinct, adding spooky ideas to shapes that we're unfamiliar with so we run away to safety, all powered by the dim glow of the moon. Insert well-written transition. Fairy type is definitely a different type of Pokemon. I mean, it's almost alien, and that's, funnily enough, another popular theory as to what fairy types are. I mean, look at Sylveon. Disgusting. Look at those gross, fleshy tentacles.
My ribbons are made of flesh!
The whole fairy types are aliens theory is interesting, but a bit weak. In summary, it's just like the Deny from WoW. These odd-colored creatures crash-landed and started to spread out to claim territory. This theory is somewhat backed up by quite a few fairy moves being moon-themed, along with the moon and dawnstone evolutions in the typing. But that whole moon thing is kinda already explained when you look into fairy lore. You can easily see that the moon really is more fairy than it is alien. I just know that if I hadn't mentioned this theory, someone would complain in the comments about how I didn't actually look up anything. So ha! I still probably missed some. But ha! And if I did miss some, well, you know what to do. Tell me about it in the comments. You always do. Just put a little smiley face after it. So, yeah, I know you're not being rude. So now that we've covered what the fairy type Pokemon aren't, let's summarize what they are. They are either magical users of light magic, which is invoked, or they manipulate the flow of natural magics rather than change it. Fairy Pokemon could be described as the natural magic type, the only true magic type, whereas Dragon is artificial magic type. And Fairy type is also Game Freak's attempt to get more young girls into Pokemon, even though I would sort of think Gen 2 was kind of the same with all the baby Pokemon. Fairies really shouldn't be pink, but modern media and marketing disagrees with me. So I guess they're pink. Oh yeah, fairy type Pokemon ruined the game! That is, unless of course you like the fairy types, and then it probably made the game great for you. Ignore the opinion there that you don't agree with, and like me more because we share opinions. Ain't it great? So hit that like button and go to Gnoggin.net to pre-order this fairy skull design. Look at all the fairy stuff around this edgy noggin. Yeah, it's cool. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, never stop using your noggin.